Okay, so now in this third video, in the first video we did demand, in the second video we did supply. Now we finish and put it all together. Okay, so right here. Video number 1. Beginning with my example of Sour Patch Kids. That was my demand curve that was downward sloping. We looked at why it is downward sloping. That would be the law of demand. We looked at movements versus shifts. And then in video number 2, same market, Sour Patch Kids. We looked at supply. And we looked at why upward sloping. And we looked at movements versus shifts. And that brings us to the third video. Where we get the incredibly valuable information. There's my demand. There's my supply. And that I get an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium, what is that? It basically means that there's no tendency for change. So basically the demand is going to counteract the supply, and specifically at that one point, as you see here, remember this demand curve has lots of little points on it, all called quantity demanded points. And that there's a supply curve with a whole bunch of various quantity supplied points. And that there's some point right there where this is true, where at the equilibrium, the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. See, at a different price, Sour Patch Kids market, then at the price of $4, let's put $4 way up here. At the price of $4, here's my quantity demanded, and here is my quantity supplied. You don't need exact numbers here, but let's throw some numbers in. I'm just going to make up these numbers. Let's say that that's 100, and let's say that that's 600. So basically what we're saying here is that if I told buyers and sellers independently that the price is $4, that 100 buyers would say, hey, I will buy that. But 600 sellers say, hey, I would sell that. There's a difference, right? And that difference from here to here is 500. In fact, it's 500 too much, which we would call surplus. at the price of $2, kind of trying to get something specific here. The quantity demanded, let's say that that's 175. Sorry. Quantity demanded, let's say is 250. I know the numbers don't look exactly nice looking here. But now what we see is at the price of $2, it touches the supply curve where we have 175 being offered for sale, but 250 people want it. So now we have a shortage of 75. So here's my question for you. What happens at the stores that you encounter in your everyday life when there's a surplus? What tends to happen in that kind of market? Well, typically, at least in the kind of stores I go to, right, it goes to the clearance rack. And what do we see at the clearance rack? We see prices that have gone down. What is sold at the clearance rack is things that, you know, after the season is done, still was not sold, meaning they made too many. And the price falls. Right, so let's imagine we're on the mainland. It's very cold on the mainland. Here's my demand. Here's my supply. And let's say that back in February, like last February, they said, oh my God, it's going to be a really great summer. Everyone's going to go out. And right, they weren't thinking of COVID. They're like, everyone's going to go out to the beach this year. Totally cool. Let's make a whole bunch. Well, come the end of the summer, they realized that the $45 they were charging for each pair of shorts, well, now summer's even done, and plus COVID's still going on. So this is how many people wanted it. This is how many sellers had stuck on their hands. So we had the surplus. The retailer moves it to the clearance rack. Now watch this. So they move it to the clearance rack, and they move the price down to, let's say, $25. Very important what I'm about to write here. As the price falls from 45 to 25, two things happen. Quantity demanded rises. We know that because of the law of demand. And quantity supplied falls. And we know that because of the law of supply. More specifically, that there'll be a movement along the demand curve. That's right there. That there will be All the great colors are kind of taken here, huh? I don't even know what that is. That there'll be a movement along the supply curve. And these things keep moving until, get right there. That right there is a beautiful part of a picture. And I would argue to you that if you are considering getting a tattoo for this course to memorialize the fact that you took this course, I'm going to strongly suggest that you get this as your tattoo. Now, I am more than willing to trace it out for you. I mean, I've seen enough of those shows on like AMC, like with like Kat Von D, and just to like trace out tattoos. I mean, dude, she's not an economist. I will trace this out for you. What is beautiful about this picture is that it basically means that this is why markets are so great, because we don't have to worry about markets only acting in the best interest of buyers or sellers. In fact, you basically could look at the price of $45 and say, dude, something is screwed up. Either buyers didn't behave like we thought they would and bought as much in June as we thought they would when we made that prediction in February, or sellers overestimated what would be bought. Somewhere, someone got something wrong, and the net result, or the consequence of getting things wrong, is that there was too much. There was a surplus. And so the only way you can get rid of a surplus in a meaningful way using the market is by reducing the price. And as you reduce the price, you finally get someone to say, I'll wear shorts in November on the mainland, or I'll put it in my drawer and just bring it out next year, right? But you have to drop the price to get a consumer to change their mind. Again, that's the red. People buying more as the price falls. And for sellers, right, they're like, I thought I was going to get 45. Now I'm only getting 25. Like, okay, I'll still make some, but I'm not going to make as much as I was going to make when I was getting 45. And so you get that twin movement. What happens when there's a shortage? Right? Just kind of like buying like N95 masks in like February, right? Because the only people that were buying N95 masks were like healthcare workers, people painting stuff, because like people who do like outdoor projects, they need N95 masks. But we clearly weren't making enough, right? Especially considering the price. Because essentially, right, there's the various factors that are going on here. Well, let's not talk about what those factors are, but, or at least not yet. But that basically the price was too low. And that at the price of $2, there was 100 sold. The people wanted 1,000. So the shelves are barren. There's nothing on the shelf. So what do retailers do? They raise the price. As the price rises, again, quantity demanded falls. We know that from the law of demand. Quantity supplied rises from the law of supply. Until we move along the supply curve and we move along the demand curve until we get to that equilibrium. Where at that equilibrium, the QD equals the QS. Same over here, right? At that, the QD equals the QS. There's just as many buyers as sellers. Which means if you want the really, really, really good tattoo for this course, well, it would look something like this. We call this price high. We call that price low. The beauty of this picture, and you don't use all the colors in your tattoo. It's okay. But the beauty of this picture is that no one has to be smart. The market will do what it needs to do. And by that I mean retailers will react to shortages and surpluses by adjusting their prices. And as they adjust their price, the market will find an equilibrium. So there is a finding process that's going on. You're not going to get the right price right away, but eventually you will find the right price, which is generally speaking why people are against, not people, but economists are against price controls. Because the moment you stop the market from being able to do what it wants to do, you will not be in equilibrium. Let me just give you an extreme example if you don't believe me. So in the United States, if you are quite poor, then we know that you are eligible for what's called Section 8 housing. Section 8 housing is housing that's provided at an incredibly low cost by the state and through the federal government. And what we know is that that price is set very, very low so that it's affordable for individuals. But in some sense, it's set so low that there are people who could afford that, let's say $100 a month in rent, but there's nothing out there to rent. There's not enough units out there. And so the price is kept artificially low, P subscript L. So you've got all this demand for it, but not enough units. And it's kept there. And it's unfortunate in some sense because what it means is that, yes, we make housing incredibly cheap for those who have very little. But now it's you only get the housing if you're lucky and fortunate enough to be able to get that housing. And don't get me wrong, I like Hawaii. There are many reasons why I prefer living in Hawaii than I do the mainland. But one thing that does bother me slightly about this place, and I don't, probably not too many people are going to disagree with me on this part. And if you do, it doesn't really matter if you disagree with me. But it's an island, so people know people, right? And if you know the right people, you can get certain advantages over others. And right, we have to suspect that something like that goes on when something is in, what we would say, short supply, when the price is kept artificially low. It's not fair, it's not right. And it's exactly the stuff that kind of happens in an economy when you don't just let the price determine how much will be sold. Okay, well, I've already kind of given away a lot of this here, so I'm not going to we're looking for the equilibrium price. And the equilibrium quantity. But the key ideas being it's where the supply equals, the quantity supplied equals the demand, quantity demand equals the quantity supplied. And there's a beautiful looking picture of it with those ice cream cones. Again, I've already talked about this. This is just reviewing it. But again, when you have a surplus, it's the issue that quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. That is our surplus. And that the reaction to this surplus is lowering the price. As the price is lowered, there's a movement. And you've got one dictated by the law of demand, and the other dictated by the law of supply. Whereas price goes down, quantity demanded goes up, and quantity supplied goes down. On the opposing side, with a shortage, the quantity demanded now exceeds the quantity supplied. That is the essence of our shortage. The consequence of that is that the price goes up with a movement along the curve dictating the law of demand and law of supply, which would mean that the quantity demanded will fall and the quantity supplied will rise as the price is rising. And again, a market can be forced to be stuck in a perpetual excess demand and excess supply situation if you make the prices artificially not able to change. That's not a good thing. It really is not. I would prefer that things just be priced given whatever the demand is, not that things be set artificially low to make things seem exciting. I mean, this is like the essence of like Black Friday, right? If you get up super duper 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 early and you go to Best Buy, you can get a Nintendo Switch. But if you can't get there early enough to get that really, really cheap price, the shelf will be empty. So, right, there's the problem. Shelf being empty is the shortage. Well, dude, that's because you were selling a Nintendo Switch for like, I don't know, let's just think of a really cheap price, like an abnormally cheap price, $150. Dude, the price was so cheap, it got people excited to come to Best Buy, but the result was that when Scheiding, the late riser, finally rolls into Best Buy at 11 a.m. on Black Friday, they're not getting jack. Oh, good joke. Trust me, Harold, it's not or demand, it's supply and demand. I see, because they're in the snow and he's supplying it, but why would he want it? Because it's so cold. You know, this joke doesn't really make a lot of sense because, fun little fact, the greatest demand for Slurpees in the world, 7-Eleven Slurpees, is actually Canada. And in Canada, on the coldest of days, everyone wants Slurpees, which are cold. So I don't know why I just told you that, but it just makes, like, what is this author doing? Just picking, like, buying cheap jokes just to throw in here? I mean, that doesn't even, it's not a class about making good jokes. Okay. Now with this understanding of equilibrium, now we need to talk about something that is called comparative statics. So if you're looking for the term on the internet that you want to type in to learn more, you don't like what I have, type in the word comparative statics, in economics. And here's what we're trying to do here. Is we're trying to say some event happens. And what we're trying to say is, what is the consequence? Quite frankly, economics as a discipline would, if I couldn't predict the future, I'd be as good as a historian, right? And historians have a hard time finding a job, and they don't make a lot of money. And economists make more money and practically have no problems finding a job. And that's because economists are a little bit better at predicting the future. And the reason why they're better at predicting the future is because we use these comparative statics, where we're told that some event happens, and I have to predict the consequence. So let's give an example here. Hurricane! And then I want to say, what will happen in the generator market after a hurricane happens? I, as an economist, can predict that. Let's talk about how I could do that. So let's look at this very simply, right? What does a hurricane do? It basically destroys stuff. And more specifically, it destroys power lines and the ability to deliver power to a house from the electric company. So what the hurricane does is that it increases the demand for generators, right? I don't own a generator. I don't at all. But if a hurricane came and now I don't have power, dude, Scheiding likes his air conditioning, right? So I'm going to now all of a sudden want to buy a generator to power my air conditioner, which means from a graphical perspective, assuming nothing else is happening in the market, the supply curve will not be affected. Let's just say all the generators are brought to the islands long before the hurricane comes. And then here was my demand curve. And then the hurricane happens. And now all of a sudden, I really want this thing, which we're going to see with an increase in the price and an increase in the quantity. So now I can make a prediction. If a hurricane comes, prices are probably going to go up because more people want these things. So when demand increases, equilibrium price goes up, equilibrium quantity goes up. Okay, let's go here. So we're making vaccines and whatnot, and they're being made in existing vaccine plants. Well, let's say all of a sudden the military says, dude, you're not making these vaccines fast enough. We just need to pump this bad boy out. Okay. Well, here's my supply, here's my demand. And if the army starts making them, that would be represented as more sellers. So we're going to have an increase in supply. And what we're going to see here is that the price will fall and the quantity will rise. So when supply goes up, then equilibrium price falls and equilibrium quantity rises. And we see this right here. I mean, dude, I'm kind of happy that the election is done because I disliked so much of what was on TV, right? It was just like people yelling at each other and people thinking they're all like high and mighty and they're right and the other side of people is wrong. Like, dude, the world just doesn't, it's not my job to teach you about the way that the world works and how life is, but very rarely is there a clear right and wrong, right? And it's just the world's not that easy to um, sort out. So, like, right, even though I disagree with a certain political belief, right, I can't just say, dude, it's wrong. It's gonna have some salient beliefs. It's gonna have some things that are right about it. But if you put on TV more politics, there's certainly a segment of people that are gonna be like, dude, I don't want to watch this anymore. Right? So if you put more politics on TV, then people just don't want to watch it. Like, oh. So demand falls. People don't want to watch this show anymore. Price falls, quantity falls. So when demand falls, equilibrium price falls and equilibrium quantity falls. And finally, right, ivory. Right, the way you make ivory is a pretty, oh no, even better, even better. Let's not make it so gory. Diamonds. So I don't know. I got married 9 years ago. So when I got married, I mean, I don't know if it was like on the end of an era or something like that, but you basically did what your parents did, your grandparents did, and whatever, right? You go out there, right? The proposer, doesn't have to be the male, right? It could be the female, but the proposer goes and buys a diamond engagement ring, right? And spends like a bunch of money on a diamond engagement ring, and right then the other person says yes, hopefully, and then you buy a diamond wedding band, right? If we're talking about the woman that's receiving from the male, um, right? So that means I'm buying, as the person that was proposing to the person that would become my wife. Oh, dude, I was buying a lot of diamonds. I'd never bought a diamond before, and all of a sudden I'm buying all these diamonds, right? It makes me sound like a rich man. It's not like a bunch of diamonds, but you get what I'm saying. Um, and then like not even like 2 or 3 years after I got married, right? One of my more socially conscious friends got married, and he was like, "Dude, Scheiding, what do you do? Why'd you buy all these diamonds? Diamonds are bad. Didn't you see that like one movie? I don't know, it was like Blood Diamonds or something like that. Like, you know, I never saw it, but right, it's got some be something like right. Most diamonds come from South Africa, and they like employ kids or there's blood on someone's hands, right? It's not a you're hurting a lot of people by me demanding this diamond, and all of a sudden the people that make rings are like, dude, we don't want to be in business with slave labor, so we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to instead make alternative things, right? So we're going to have like synthetic diamonds or other kinds of things like that. So I could have probably thought of a better example here that wasn't so long-winded. But the idea is that there are fake diamonds out there that are better than just like the old school, like glass, cubic zirconium kinds of diamonds. But there's some pretty cool looking things out there. And you can, because they were easier to make than people that used to make regular diamond rings got out of that business or reduced how much of that they sell. Meaning, that in the market for regular diamonds, here's my demand, here's my supply, that the supply is reduced. Causing my equilibrium price to rise and my equilibrium quantity to fall. So already, if you understand this, you can already make some very simple predictions about events, right? So if I tell you, what do you expect is going to happen to the price of gas if people are working from home? Then you have to think in your head, okay, what curve is affected? Well, it's probably going to be demand, right? Because now people are not going to the gas station, are not driving to work every day and using their cars. So it's demand. So identify the curve, then identify what direction that curve is moving. Okay, they're not doing something. So that means demand is going to fall. And so once you determine the curve, and you identify what direction that curve is moving, then you can predict. Well, again, I don't preview the slides here, but at least the slides are just thinking just like me. There we go. Now, we need to talk about this part still. But let's just say we're talking about just the supply or the demand curve. One of them changes. We have to determine which one it is, what direction it moves, and then we can predict equilibrium price and quantity changes. Let's talk about what happens when they both move. Let's go back to my generator example. As we know, generators are probably not made here in Hawaii, right? They're coming from the mainland, which would mean they would have to travel by boat here. Again, let's say we have the hurricane. Now, most people, I'm a new homeowner, so I haven't planned ahead as much as others, but most people, this isn't their first rodeo. They bought the generator 5 years ago when they thought there was a hurricane. So it's sitting in their garage or whatever, and it's just sitting there. Meaning the hurricane happens, and as we already said, it's going to affect demand, but it's actually not going to affect demand that much. So notice the magnitude of the shift here. We're saying it's not going to affect things too much because most people already have a generator. But if the hurricane wipes out the port, right, that will dramatically affect how many generators can be brought to Hawaii, causing this huge decrease in supply. So we've got demand increasing, we've got supply decreasing by even more. And we're going to see here that the price is rising and the quantity is falling. But what if whatever the event it was the opposite, where demand increased a lot and supply decreased only a little? Now I can get my equilibrium price to rise and my equilibrium quantity to rise as well. Look at that. What if I change them by an equal amount? Now quantity did not change at all and price increased. If we were to compare all three scenarios, in all three scenarios, the price increased. Here, here, and here. But depending on which one was shifting more or less than the other, quantity either fell, increased, or stayed the same. What it does is it says that one thing is happening unambiguously and the other one is happening ambiguously. By something happening ambiguously, we basically need more information. I would have to tell you, hurricane, bad thing happens. I would have to give you some indication like very much, very little, equally so, right? So that you could determine whether it was picture number 1, picture number 2, with demand shifting now more than supply, or picture number 3, where they shift equal amounts. That's how you'll know in what direction price moves. And so then here, right, we can say very hot weather. People are going to want a whole bunch of ice cream, right? And that's what this is going to look like. Simple stuff, right? Again, if demand goes up, price goes up, quantity goes up. We know that from we know that from right here. Demand goes up, quantity goes up, price goes up. Okay. We don't need that again. Here we've got a decrease in supply, causing an increase in price, decrease in quantity. Again, you can go back to that earlier chart and prove that to yourself. Or if we shift both curves, hurricane and heat wave, then it matters how much they are shifting. Is it a minor hurricane, very hot weather, really big hurricane, only mildly hot? Right? It's going to determine whether the price here, right? Supply is decreasing by a little bit, but demand is increasing by a lot. And the consequence is that the price goes up in this case, and that the quantity goes up in this case. Same things, but now let's say that I decrease the supply a lot and increase demand very little. Now I can get my quantity to fall, but my price still goes up. And if I'd shifted them equally, quantity would have been the same. Now, you can also make it where not quantity is the ambiguous variable, but rather price. So this is a pretty helpful chart that summarizes this as well. Again, ambiguous basically means more info is needed. You need more information to say whether demand shifts more or less than supply. I'll let you read those jokes. And basically, a slide that celebrates my love of prices and why I hope after all 3 of these videos, why you like prices now more too.